Released in 1994 for the original Game Boy, Donkey Kong, or Donkey Kong 94 as some people have referred to it, or Game Boy Donkey Kong as the title screen refers it, was the flagship title of Nintendo's Super Game Boy accessory for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System that allowed you to play Game Boy games on your TV. Not only that, but you could play them in color, 4 of them of your own choosing or one of several palettes built in. With some games, you get some extra bits on the old SGB, whether it be a special border, more colorful games, or even bits of enhanced sound. Case in point, Donkey Kong. Start the game and you get a fairly accurate yet somewhat easier conversion of the original arcade game's 4 levels. Sound effects are recreated nicely, general gameplay is familiar fare, you've got a couple new moves to whiff through this quickly, but it's not too bad. The only thing that's new here is the ending, where after the supposed happy ending, old DK recovers and separates the happy couple once more, leading to a much grander adventure spanning 9 worlds and close to 100 levels. And this is where our game truly begins. Spanning 9 worlds and 96 more levels that aren't arcade adaptations, Donkey Kong has 2 stage types. Your standard normal levels and your boss levels. In the normal levels, your main goal is to find a key on the level and take it to the door in order to move on to the next level, making sure to avoid enemies, hazards, or unnecessary pratfalls that will throw a hamper on that plan. The boss levels generally play like new levels of the old arcade game. Get past all the machinations of the level and reach the top to clear. To throw a monkey wrench into that formula, no pun intended, the final boss of each world has you confronting Donkey Kong directly, where you'll have to grab barrels or other items and toss 3 of them at the big ape to subdue him for a moment before he flees, grabs the girl, and moves on to the next world. Donkey Kong follows a formula in its stage progression, where you'd play 3 normal stages followed by a boss level. Clearing the boss level then allows you to save your progress at the next segment. There's an option to save and quit along the way, but you'll only restart at the beginning of the current segment that you're playing. In the decade plus since Mario and Donkey Kong last crossed paths, the old Jumpman has learned a few new tricks, some of which are vital to progressing in these new worlds. He can now stand on certain enemies and use them as a means to reach higher ground, or he can pick them up and chuck them at others a la SMB2. He can do a handstand to deflect barrels and also give them a bit of a jumping boost in height. He can operate switches to manipulate terrain. He can grab onto a tightrope and use momentum to propel himself to higher ground. Some levels have tiles that you could grab onto to create temporary platforms and ladders whenever you decide to place them, a gimmick that sees much use in later levels. And if you prefer something more blunt, you'll find the old school hammer laying around somewhere as a temporary weapon, and its effectiveness is bolstered by your ability to toss the hammer into the air, useful for segments where you want to take it to higher ground. These are things that are vital to success in Donkey Kong 94, and the game's intermissions will sometimes show you these tricks in action. Touching enemies, falling into hazards, and landing on your head from great distances will kill you, unless you've got a key on hand, in which case you'll lose the key and be temporarily stunned. Awkward landings from huge falls that isn't on your hand will also stun you for a brief moment, which could either be a mild setback or an opening to a more fatal situation. All these things contribute to Donkey Kong's overall challenge, just so you know, and knowing is half the battle. The other half is trying not to lose the key, because if you fail to reclaim the key, it'll respawn back to its original spot and all your efforts will be for naught. And yes, there is a time limit, so you better get a move on. Fortunately, Donkey Kong makes it easy to stack up on extra lives, and the game does keep track of how many lives you have on reserve whenever you save a game. Of course, there's the time-honored tradition of collecting 1-up hearts that would inhabit some of these levels, all of which are in plain sight. Every 4 segments, all your remaining time ticks are added up and tallied, and for every 100 ticks, you get an extra life. So that gives you a little more incentive to clear those levels quickly. And finally, if you're able to grab all 3 of Pauline's vanity items, you'll be able to play one of 2 bonus games after clearing a level, whether it be a slot machine gimmick that's pretty self-explanatory, or this roulette thing which guarantees you some extra lives. With how easy it is to get more lives, the risk feels less so, and Donkey Kong's teeth is dulled quite a bit. But don't get too cocky, or else you'll see those lives eat up rather quickly. Donkey Kong is an interesting little game as it sometimes feels like two different games crammed into one, the majority comprising looking for keys and reaching the exit, while the minority seems like extensions of the classic Donkey Kong style of play. With the latter, things are a little more straightforward with some clever levels for you to tackle, including some taken from Donkey Kong Jr., the arcade sequel, and even Jr. will occasionally show up to help the old man out at times. And with the former, there is certainly a puzzle-solving element with the magic tiles, switches, and other bits used to manipulate the levels in an effort to get the key to the exit, and some of these will take a while to figure out before it just clicks. You're not just trying to navigate these death traps, you're doing it in a way as to not lose your grip on this key that's weighing you down. Whereas in the latter case, it's more straightforward and sometimes ends up being a nice reprieve from the brain-racking main course, even though they're technically boss battles. It's this divide that might split players on Donkey Kong, as those who prefer a more old-school flavor might scoff at the lock and key approach to the levels, while those who want a little more will get a little more. This is one of those attempts to add mileage to an old arcade title for the home, or portable in this case, and there's been numerous examples of that on the NES alone. Donkey Kong's approach certainly works to give it some legs and depth, as minor as it may be, and the expanded controls certainly opens up potential to slightly more varied challenges. If the puzzle aspect turns you off and you would have preferred something a little more old school, sticking with what made the arcade game work, I could certainly see that point and even sympathize with it, but I think the puzzle aspect works. It works for me, at least. The visual style of Donkey Kong is fairly simplistic. Its base graphics mimics the style of the arcade original, and the 4 arcade levels look the part even with the plain white background that looks kind of awkward. But once the game expands into its main course, you've got some decent looking backgrounds to complement the obstacle course, a nice looking map screen, some smallish but clearly defined character sprites, right down to DK's now infamous tie that made its debut here and not Donkey Kong Country. Oh, and hey, Junior's in this as well, so okay then. On a regular Game Boy, it's fine. But then this was made with Super Game Boy compatibility in mind, and Donkey Kong is one of the few games that ever really took advantage of the device. It's not just a special border modeled after the old arcade cabinet, also special color palettes for each world, with maps and intermissions being more colorful than the usual output, and there's even hints of enhanced sound to be found. Stuff you didn't get when played on the old Game Boy, or even playing on stuff like the Game Boy Player or GB Color or whatever, never taking advantage of these enhancements, but you can only get them on Super Game Boy, and that makes it all the more worthwhile. Now that being said, sound is a weak point of the game, though it's not necessarily a bad thing. They managed to recreate some of the arcade sound effects to a fairly approximate level, and they sound alright. There's some new sound effects to go along with some of the new things, and they sound new. For the time at least. The music's somewhat simplistic fare, slightly above the levels of the jingles played in the old arcade games, though the farther you go in the game, the more flavorful the tunes. Eventually the tunes kind of grew on me, they're kind of catchy in their sort of low-tech way, and with the Super Game Boy you do get a couple sound enhancements, including one with the Scream. Overall, Donkey Kong on Game Boy is a worthy follow-up to the old arcade games with enough meat to keep gamers interested, though the shift to a more puzzle-based platformer might irk a few old-school folks who would prefer the game stuck with the style of the old games, because the few levels that play in that style are sublime. But I think the game as a whole is a pretty fun and creative way to expand on the gameplay, and I think it works. Apparently so did a lot of people, since this would serve as the basis for those Mario vs. Donkey Kong games that I've never played. But I did play DK94, and that's a fun time on the go, but an even better time on the Super Game Boy. Give it a shot if you haven't done so already.